Let's see if we can finally wrap up Lecture 1 of A Pluralistic Universe by William James. The last 2.5 pages of this chapter will show William James giving one reason that we may reasonably go with what he's been calling the pantheistic route. The perspective on reality preferred by someone with a sympathetic temperament, a sympathetic disposition, the kind of perspective on reality according to which we are in close relation. He uses the adjective intimate a lot. In close relation with the universe, we can be at home in the world. Reality is not something foreign to human minds. The best way of understanding the world is not foreign to human minds. Something we can be at home in is what James calls pantheism. All reality has a divine aspect. But pantheism can go the monistic route or the pluralistic route. Either all is matter, well, assuming the pantheistic perspective, sorry, not matter, either all is divine and all is one, or all is divine and not all is one. There are still different things in the universe. So a pluralistic universe means a pluralistic pantheism. All is divine, but not all is one. And he's critiquing the Hegelians, the followers of the philosopher Hegel and their the philosophy of the absolute, as he calls it, that they tout, the monistic branch of pantheism. He's opposing the monistic branch of pantheism. He's defending the pluralistic version of pantheism. And anyway, what was I saying? In this closing of Lecture 1, he's going to give one more reason we may prefer that pantheistic route. And then he's going to preview his reasoning against the monistic version of pantheism and in favor of the pluralistic version of pantheism. Okay, let's finally get to the text now. As a convenient way of entering into the study of their differences, I may refer to a recent article by Professor Jacks of Manchester College. Professor Jacks sent some brilliant pages in the Hibbert Journal for last October, studies the relation between the universe and the philosopher who describes it, defines it for us. You may assume two cases, he says. Now, this is going to be fascinating, and I wish I had more time and more brain cells for sorting this all out. I think you'll find a related passage in considered in another video on this channel. Find the video about what William James says about the beings. Yes, beings, B-E-A-N-S. Either what the philosopher tells us is extraneous to the universe he is accounting for, an indifferent, parasitic outgrowth, so to speak, or the fact of his philosophizing is itself one of the things taken account of in the philosophy and self-included in the description. So we can think of the world and the philosopher investigating the world in two ways. We can think of the world as just there, and then the philosopher's investigating it is something else. Or we can think of the world as the sum total that includes both whatever were the pre-existing facts plus the philosopher's investigation of the facts. The investigation of the facts is itself a part of the sum total of the facts, right? The philosopher investigating the world, well, there's a fact that the philosopher is investigating the world. Shouldn't we take that into consideration? In the former case, the philosopher means by the universe everything except what his own presence brings. In the latter case, his philosophy is itself an intimate part of the universe and may be a part momentous enough to give a different turn to what the other parts signify. It may be a supreme reaction of the universe upon itself by which it rises to self-comprehension. It may handle itself differently in consequence of this event. All right. If we think of our own understanding of the world as itself part of that world we are understanding, then that may have an effect on what sort of world there is. Our studying of the world, our thinking about the world, our living in the world, is itself a part of the world and has an effect on what is the final state of the world. This is the sort of thing James has been talking about for decades. It's all over the Will to Believe and other essays in popular philosophy. You've probably seen me sit in this very chair and chatter about it endlessly if you've watched enough of this channel. Now, both empiricism, let's clarify, James was there commenting on, he was paraphrasing the analysis of Professor Jacks in some brilliant pages in the Hibbert Journal for last October. Now, let's go to the next paragraph where James is just speaking for himself. He's totally agreeing with Professor Jacks on this point, of course. Now, both empiricism and absolutism bring the philosopher inside and make man intimate, but the one being pluralistic and the other monistic, they do so in differing ways that need much explanation. Let me then contrast the one with the other way of representing the status of the human thinker. Okay. James is agreeing that it is appropriate, agreeing with his Professor Jacks, that it's appropriate to consider that our own reflection on the universe is part of the universe, and that when we take into account our own thoughts, our own beliefs, our own preferences, our own action in the world, it is likely to have some effect on the world such that the sum total of what is the final truth, if there ever is a final truth, the ultimate truth, the last truth, at any rate, a truth more complete than what we have now, is going to include the results of us, the results of what we think and what we prefer and what we do. We are part of reality, and we're going to leave our own mark on it. We're going to have an effect on the very reality we are part of, that we know. There's no separation of world from knower. The knower is part of the world. It has an effect on the world. Now, this is a way of thinking, James says, that works very well for either form of pantheism, the pluralistic or the monistic. But the empirical pluralistic pantheism and the absolutist monistic pantheism, the more Hegelian pantheism, are not going to give the same account of exactly how it is we are at home in the universe. We are, without sexual connotations, intimate with the universe. We are integral. That's a good adjective. We are an integral part of reality. That's a good adjective. This way of thinking that Professor Jacks describes works very well for satisfying the needs of the sympathetic temperament he's been talking about. And so far, the Hegelian and William James agree. But there's different ways of following through on this, and James is now going to outline why he thinks the empiricist pluralistic way is better than the monistic absolutist way. For monism, the world is no collection, but one great all-inclusive fact, outside of which is nothing. Nothing is its only alternative, etc., etc. When we speak of the absolute, you know what, let's not skip the beginning of that. Let's not skip the previous sentence. I have skipped about a paragraph or two. But one, as we are in this material sense with the absolute substance, that being only the whole of us, and we only the parts of it, yet in a formal sense, something like a pluralism breaks out. When we speak of the absolute, we take the one universal known material collectively or integrally. When we speak of its objects, of our finite selves, etc., we take that same identical material distributively and separately. So he's talking about the monistic perspective. He's doing his best to articulate what that perspective says, and it says all reality is ultimately one. We are parts of it. And even though we are ultimately parts of one single reality, James observes, when we take the one universal reality, when we speak of the universal, the one, the absolute, we take reality whole. We take reality all together. But when we speak of us, the parts, we take the same identical material distributively and separately. When we take the world, when we consider the world with attention to us, its parts, even if you're a Hegelian pantheist, a monistic pantheist, an absolutist, even if you go this way, when you think of the parts in the world, you are taking the world in a pluralistic way. So James is saying, even if we presume that Hegelian monistic pantheist perspective, there's still some kind of a pluralism that breaks out, because we are taking the world as if it's pluralistic. Now, the taking matters. But what is the use of a thing's being only once if it can be taken twice over, and if being taken in different ways makes different things true of it? So this goes back again to the lovely remarks on the beings. Find the other video on this channel on the subject if you like. This goes back to the paragraph on the former page where he's paraphrasing Professor Jacks. There's reality, and maybe it is absolutely one, as the Hegelians say. Then there's the reality plus how we take it. And even if you are a Hegelian, you still have to take the reality. And As we've just observed, when we take reality in a certain way, that taking is itself part of reality and must be taken seriously. What is the use of a thing's being only once if it can be taken twice over, and if being taken in different ways makes different things of it? If we are Hegelians, we still treat the world as if it's a pluralism. And that matters, because how we treat the world is itself part of the world. And so there's something funny about this absolutist pantheism. Practical differences result, rewind just a bit. As the absolute takes me, for example, I will appear with everything else in its field of perfect knowledge. As I take myself, I appear without most other things in my field of relative ignorance, and practical differences result from its knowledge and my ignorance. So, reality from the perspective of God, from the perspective of the One itself, would see me as just a part of everything. But reality from my perspective is not like that. And practical differences result from my ignorance of that ultimate reality. The absolute can't be ignorant, it can't be surprised, it can't be guilty. No attribute connected with succession, i.e. passage of time, can be applied to it, etc., etc. So he's already moved into saying there is the world as we experience it, and it sure looks pluralistic, not pantheistic. But our own experiencing of the world, as he's just been saying in these 2 pages, is itself part of the world and must be taken seriously. The world as it is and the world as we take it are not necessarily exactly the same thing. And anyway, what's the point of saying the world simply is this if we still have to take it in some way, and if the taking, i.e. the world as we experience it, can be reasonably taken to be part of the world, since we are not separate from the world now, are we? Things true of the world in its finite aspects then are not true of it in its infinite capacity, according to the monistic perspective. As finite and plural, its accounts of itself to itself are different from what its account to itself as infinite and one must be. With this radical discrepancy between the absolute and the relative points of view, it seems to me that almost as great a bar to intimacy between the divine and the human breaks out in pantheism as that which we found in monarchical theism, and hope that pantheism might not show. We humans are incurably rooted in the temporal point of view. Let us imitate the all, said the original prospectus of that admirable Chicago quarterly called The Monist, as if we could, either in thought or conduct. We are invincibly parts. Let us talk as we will. We must always apprehend the absolute as if it were a foreign being. Okay, I'm not going to try to explain everything here, even if I could. The point is, the monistic pantheism, the philosophy of the absolute, the Hegelian perspective, has the same dang problems as scholastic theism. I would say it was probably 2 videos back where I tried to explain James' view on what's wrong with scholastic theism. It makes ultimate reality God, who is separate from us, and so it makes us strangers in the universe. Turns out pantheism on the Hegelian model does the same thing, because the world as we experience it pluralistically turns out to be totally different from ultimate reality as it is in itself, which is fundamentally one. We cannot imitate the absolute that is everything on Hegelian pantheism. We are parts of the universe, and we can't not be parts of the universe. So, experience will speak against monistic pantheism, and the rest of the book is going to go into more detail on that. And I'll probably have to pay closer attention in future to the arguments for monistic pantheism, because James is, well, because I owe it to you and to myself, since one of my goals in this series is to gain a better understanding of this book. But also James is going to spend some time going over their arguments in more detail. That'll be our opportunity to figure out what these Hegelian philosophers James is dealing with at the time, what they're thinking. All right, enough. See you next time, Lecture 2. If you watch this whole thing, good grief, thanks for watching.